have camped alone more times than I can count, but there is one night I still can't explain, no matter how calmly I try to recount it. It happened on a late summer trip in a remote valley where the trees grew so close together that the sky looked fractured between the branches. I had chosen that place because no cell towers reached it, and I wanted a break from everything. I wanted a quiet night, a fire, and the steady comfort of being alone in nature. The hike in took most of the afternoon. By the time I reached a clearing beside a narrow stream, the sun set low behind the ridge, leaving the water in cool shadow. The air felt unusually still, as if the usual insects and birds had stepped back to observe me rather than fill the forest with their usual presence. I didn't let it bother me. I focused on setting up my tent, collecting dry wood, and fishing my small cookpot out of my pack. After I ate, I sat on a small boulder and listened to the stream. It had a steady, patient rhythm that helped me unwind. I stayed there longer than I meant to, just letting the calmness stretch out around me. When I finally turned in for the night, the darkness inside the tent felt thicker than normal, like a blanket pressed too close to my face. I fell asleep quickly, but I woke up sometime later with a strange awareness that something had shifted. Not a sound, because there was nothing to hear. It was the absence of everything familiar. No breeze coming through the trees, no water moving over stones, no rustling animals in the distance. It was as though the entire valley was holding its breath. My first instinct was to unzip the tent door and look around, but something in me resisted. I couldn't explain it, but I felt as if the moment I opened the tent, I would invite something in. I stayed still, listening to that unnatural silence. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I lost track. Then I became aware of a faint glow outside the tent. It wasn't bright enough to be a flashlight or a fire. It reminded me of light reflected off snow at dusk. Soft and cold, but steady. I eased myself upright and checked my phone, expecting the screen to light up the tent. It didn't. The battery was completely dead, even though it had been nearly full before I fell asleep. I finally convinced myself to peek outside. The zipper moved slowly under my hand, and when the flap opened, I saw the clearing lit by the faint glow I had noticed. It had no source. It seemed to float above the ground itself, as if the air had taken on its own pale color. The trees around the clearing weren't just still. They looked rigid, almost sharpened, like they were carved from stone. The stream, which had flowed steadily earlier, looked frozen in place, but the temperature wasn't cold enough for that. It looked as if time around it had stopped. I stepped out of the tent cautiously, unsure whether I wanted answers or simply wanted to understand what I was seeing. The ground felt normal beneath my feet, but the air felt unnaturally heavy, as though I was walking underwater. I moved toward the stream, drawn by some mix of curiosity and fear. Halfway there, the glow shifted. It didn't brighten. It deepened, as though something behind it was pushing through. The clarity of the clearing began to blur, like an image smudged by a thumb across glass. The shapes of the trees wavered at their edges. The stream started to move again, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had released a paused video. The air warmed. Crickets began chirping again in a sudden rush. The glow dissolved into the returning darkness, as if it had never existed. I stood there, breathing hard, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The forest was alive again with all the usual nighttime activity. Everything looked normal, almost reassuringly so, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been observing me from just beyond the edges of that pale light. I packed up before sunrise. I didn't make breakfast or enjoy the early morning calm. I folded the tent with shaking hands, slung my pack over my shoulders, and left the valley without looking back. Even now, I don't know what I witnessed. I only know that whatever held that valley in stillness for those few impossible minutes wasn't something natural, and I don't camp in that region anymore. I don't think anyone should. I wasn't planning to camp that night. My original route was supposed to take me back to my car before sunset, but I misread the trail markers and ended up several miles deeper into the backcountry than expected. By the time I realized the mistake, the sky had already dimmed to that dull shade between daylight and evening. Rather than risk wandering in circles in the dark, I found a flat patch of ground beside an old service road and decided to stay there until morning. The place didn't feel welcoming. The trees stood crooked, as if they had grown while leaning away from something. Thick moss covered every exposed surface, even the rocks, giving the landscape a muted, almost sickly tone. But I reminded myself that a bad vibe was better than a broken ankle. I set up my tent quickly, ate a cold dinner from my pack, and sat outside for a while, trying to map out where I had gone wrong earlier. Across the road, I could make out the faint outline of an abandoned cabin. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The roof sagged in the middle, and the windows stared outward like empty eye sockets. Normally, I avoid structures like that when I'm alone, but something about its presence made the area feel less isolated, so I let it be. When I finally crawled into my tent, I felt a strange heaviness settle over me. Not fear exactly. I lay still, trying to ignore the sensation. Fatigue eventually overpowered it. I woke later with a subtle feeling that I wasn't alone outside anymore. I couldn't hear anything specific. It was more like an instinctive pressure, like someone watching me from a distance. I told myself it was nerves. My brain was probably trying to fill the silence with something dramatic, but the feeling grew stronger, not weaker. I sat up, unzipped the door, and looked out. The night looked ordinary at first. Then I noticed a light inside the abandoned cabin. It wasn't bright. It resembled the dull glow of a lantern that's nearly out of fuel. I hadn't seen it earlier, and given the state of the building, there shouldn't have been anything inside capable of creating that kind of glow. I stepped out of the tent, keeping still for a moment to see if the light would fade. Instead, it flickered not like a flame, but more like movement passing in front of it. The kind of interruption you'd see if a person walked by a window. I told myself it was probably other hikers, maybe people who had taken shelter in the cabin before nightfall. But I didn't remember seeing anyone on the trail all afternoon, and the cabin's door looked warped and half sunken into the ground, as if it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity pulled me forward anyway. As I approached the cabin, the glow dimmed until it was barely visible. When I reached the doorway, the light vanished entirely. I hesitated, leaning just far enough in to see the interior. The place was empty. No lantern, no signs of recent human presence. Nothing but decayed furniture and a floor blanketed with damp leaves. I backed away slowly. The moment I stepped onto the old road again, I caught movement to my left. Something leaned out from behind a tree across the clearing. I didn't see details, only a human-shaped outline, tall and thin, almost elongated. It didn't step forward. It just stood there, angled slightly. I froze. The figure didn't move closer, but it didn't retreat either. It remained there, silent and still, waiting for something I couldn't identify. I felt an instinctive warning rise through me, sharper than fear. Whatever I was looking at wasn't lost, and it wasn't seeking help. It was observing me with an intent I didn't understand. I slowly stepped backward, keeping my eyes locked on the shape. When I reached my tent, I grabbed my pack without bothering to collapse anything. I didn't care about the tent anymore. I only wanted to get away from that clearing. As I started down the road, the figure shifted behind another tree, tracking my movement without taking a full step. It wasn't following me, just watching, making sure I kept my distance. Only when the road curved and the trees blocked my view did the sensation of being studied begin to weaken. I walked until dawn broke, not daring to stop even once. When I finally reached the main trail, I turned around to check whether anything had followed me. The forest looked quiet, ordinary, completely harmless. But I will never forget that silhouette leaning out from the tree, almost curious, almost patient. I avoided that region afterward. Whatever inhabits that clearing does not want company.